At 8:43 p.m., the lockdown light above the main gate turned solid red, and I knew before anyone else in the building that we had just trapped 41,000 people inside with whatever was already in here. I remember the exact time because I was looking at the clock on the wall when it happened. It's an old analog clock, the kind with a sweeping second hand, mounted above the door of the control room where it's been since before I started. And I'd glanced at it the way you glance at a clock during the second half of a tight match, doing the math on how much night was left. The red glow from the gate indicator washed across its face a half second before the alarm tone sounded, and the second hand kept sweeping like nothing in the world had changed. And that contrast is the thing my memory locked onto. The ordinary clock and the impossible light. My name is Marcus Devane. I'd run security operations at the stadium for 19 years, and in all that time, the master lockdown had never once gone red on a live event. It was a fail-safe, the kind of thing you tested at 4 in the morning when the place was empty and the engineers wanted to watch the magnetic bolts seed into the concrete. With that deep, satisfying thud you feel in your teeth more than hear. You did not pull it during the second half of a sold-out match. You did not pull it with the concourses full and the beer lines 20 deep and the smell of fried onions and spilled lager thick in every corridor. And a man somewhere in section 114 already bleeding from a bite that none of us had clocked yet. But somebody had pulled it. And the strange part, the part that made the hair on my arms stand up before I understood anything, was that the request hadn't come from my desk. I was the only one with the authority to seal the gates. The command had to be entered from my terminal with my code by my hand. I hadn't touched the panel. I'd been standing 6 feet away from it with a lukewarm coffee going cold in my fist. And yet there it was. Glowing red, the bolts already home. The crowd outside still chanting because the noise of 40,000 people drowns out almost everything, including the sound of a door that will not open again. Before I take you the rest of the way into that night, I want to say something quickly. Thank you to everyone who keeps coming back for these stories. And if this is your first time here, welcome. If grounded survival stories like this are your kind of thing, subscribe and leave a comment so we can keep building this together. Now let me take you back to the control room, because the next thing I did was the first mistake of many. I picked up the radio and asked who'd authorized the seal. Nobody answered. There were 6 people on my channel that night, veteran staff, every one of them. Hassan on the East Concourse, Priya at the South Vomitories, Deshaun roving the Upper Bowl, Tom and Reggie working the field-level tunnels, and Lena, my deputy, who was supposed to be standing right behind me in the control room. 6 trained voices who never let a call go unanswered, because in this business, silence is the thing you fear most. You key the mic, you say a name, you get a response. That's the whole job, underneath everything else. Confirmation that the people you sent into the dark are still there. The chatter of a working radio channel is a kind of heartbeat, and you stop hearing it consciously after the first hour of a shift, the way you stop hearing your own pulse. You only notice it when it stops. I keyed it again, pressing the rubber button hard enough to feel the click through my thumb. All posts. This is Devane. Confirm status. Who tripped the master? The channel hissed. 40,000 people roaring through the concrete behind me, a sound that came up through the floor as much as through the air, a low, continuous pressure, like standing next to the ocean. And then Hassan came back. But his voice was wrong. Pitched up and tight in a way I'd never heard from him in 12 years of working together. Hassan had a voice like a slow river, deep and unhurried, the kind of voice that calmed drunk fans down before they knew they were being calmed. The voice that came over the radio now was a stranger wearing Hassan's name. Marcus, you need to look at the east tunnel cameras, right now. I turned to the bank of monitors. The control room sits above the field at the south end. A long, narrow room with a wall of screens showing every angle of the building. 240 cameras feeding into a wall of glass that glows blue-white in the dark. The room is always kept cool, almost cold for the equipment. And on a normal night, I'd have a jacket over the back of my chair. Lena's chair was empty. I noted that and filed it, the way you file things when there are too many of them coming at once. The casters of her chair had rolled back a foot from the desk, the way a chair does when someone stands up fast. I found the East Tunnel feed, camera 73, the service corridor that runs behind sections 110 through 116. The route the vendors use to restock and the medics use to move people who've had too much sun or too much drink. There were people in the corridor. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was how they were moving. Not the loose shuffle of fans heading to a restroom. They were moving in the wrong rhythm, lurching, crowding towards something on the floor, their bodies bent at angles that didn't make sense. And the something on the floor was a person. And the people around the person were down on their knees over them. And they were not performing CPR. The camera gives you no sound, which makes it worse somehow. You watch a silent scene and your mind fills in the noise it thinks should be there. And what my mind put under that picture was nothing I want to describe. I want to be precise about this, because for the first 30 seconds, I told myself a story that made sense. I told myself it was a medical event. A man down, bystanders helping. The brain does that. It reaches for the ordinary explanation and holds on to it for as long as it possibly can. Because the ordinary explanation lets you keep being the person you were a minute ago. I'd seen 100 medical events on those cameras. Heart attacks, seizures, a man who fell down the section 119 stairs and broke his hip. A kid who got crushed against a barrier and went blue before the medics reached him. I knew what helping looked like. This was not helping. I held on to my ordinary explanation anyway, white-knuckled, right up until the man on the floor sat up with half his throat gone, the dark spreading down the front of his shirt in a sheet. And the people kneeling over him did not stop, and one of them turned and looked directly up at the camera. And there was nothing behind the eyes. Nothing at all. Just a face pointed at a lens, jaw working, slick to the wrist, the mouth opening and closing on nothing. "Hassan," I said, "where are you?" "Sub-level 1. I came down when the gate sealed. Marcus, the door behind me just locked." I heard it. The deadbolt, the heavy one. It just drove home on its own. And now the whole sub-level is sealing in sections. I can hear it. The bolts are going one corridor at a time. It's coming toward me. That stopped me cold. Because the lockdown system did not work that way. The master seal was all or nothing. The gates went red, the perimeter sealed, and that was the end of it. There was no sequence. There was no one corridor at a time. The system wasn't built to do what Hassan was describing. I'd read the engineering documents myself, signed off on the annual test, watched the bolts fire all at once in a single, concussive moment that rattled the whole frame, which meant either Hassan was wrong or something was operating my building that I didn't understand. And on a night when I'd already seen a man with no throat sit up off the concrete, I wasn't betting on Hassan being wrong. I pulled up the lockdown status page on my main terminal, my fingers moving on muscle memory, navigating menus I could have found blind. The master indicator was red, yes, a single fat red dot at the top of the page. But below it, on a sub-menu I almost never opened, was a row of zone indicators I had genuinely forgotten existed. 48 zones. The building divided into 48 sealable cells. I remembered dimly an engineer mentioning zone segmentation years ago. And I remembered nodding the way you nod at technical detail that doesn't seem to concern you. And I had never once opened this page in 19 years because there had never been a reason to. And as I watched, 3 of them flipped from green to amber to red, in sequence, east to west, along sublevel 1. The colors changed with a soft animation, smooth and unhurried, like a traffic system, like something designed by someone who'd thought carefully about how it should look. Somebody, or something, was walling the building off from the inside, and it was starting at the bottom. I need you to understand the place I'm describing, because the architecture is the whole story. People think a stadium is a bowl with seats. It isn't. The bowl is maybe a third of it. Underneath and around the bowl is a city. 8 levels of service corridors, kitchens with steel surfaces and walk-in freezers, storerooms stacked to the ceiling, electrical rooms humming behind locked doors, a water treatment plant the size of a house. 2 miles of tunnel painted the same institutional gray. Loading docks that can swallow a tractor-trailer whole. A medical suite with 3 beds and a defibrillator. Holding cells for the people who get arrested on a Saturday. A server room kept colder than the control room that runs the whole operation. And the deep utility level that almost nobody but maintenance ever sees, where the pipes are as wide as a man and the air tastes of iron and standing water. When it's full on event night, there are more people working underneath the crowd than most office towers hold. Cooks sweating over fryers, cleaners with their carts, vendors hauling cases of beer on hand trucks, medics waiting by their stretchers, engineers watching gauges. And, on this particular night, a security detail of 6 plus me, spread across a structure designed to hold a small town. I'd taken the job after the Army, after 2 tours, where I learned the single most important thing I know, which is that the building you're standing in is either your friend or your enemy, and it's your job to decide which before someone else decides for you. A building has a personality. It has habits. It has places where sound carries and places where it dies, doors that swing easy and doors that fight you, corners where a man can stand unseen. For 19 years, this building had been my friend. I knew its blind spots, the 4 square feet of the northwest stairwell, where the cameras didn't reach because of a support column nobody had accounted for. I knew the dead radio zones, the belly of the deep utility level where the steel ate every signal. I knew the door on sublevel 3 that stuck in humid weather and the trick of lifting it on its hinges to get it open. I knew the building better than I knew my own apartment, where I'd lived 11 years and still couldn't have told you which way the bedroom window faced. And now, watching those zone indicators flip red one after another, I understood that I had never actually known it at all. There was a layer underneath the layer I knew, and it had just woken up. Lena's voice came over the channel. Calm, which was good, because Lena was the steadiest person I'd ever worked with. 15 years on the job, a former paramedic who'd seen more bad nights than I had. You could put Lena in a burning room, and she'd tell you where the exits were in the same tone she used to order lunch. Marcus, I'm on level 2, west side. I came down to check the breaker room when the lights flickered. The stairwell door behind me sealed. I'm not panicking. I'm telling you the system is acting like it's running a containment protocol. Not a lockdown, a containment. What's the difference? I said. Though some part of me already knew, the way you know a thing in your gut before your mouth will say it. A lockdown keeps people out, she said. It's defensive. Everything seals at the perimeter and you wait for help. Containment is different. Containment keeps things in. It works in layers, from the inside out, And it doesn't care who's standing in the doorway when the boat comes down. I've seen it in hospitals, Marcus, isolation wards. This is built like an isolation ward. The whole building. I sat with that for exactly 1 second, which was all the time I had. Because on camera 73, the thing that had been a man with no throat got to its feet, swaying, finding its balance like a newborn animal. And the people around it stood up too, all of them at once, like a tide deciding to come in. And they turned toward the door at the end of the corridor, the door that led up, toward the concourse, toward 40,000 people who still thought they were at a football match, who were on their feet right now for a corner kick, whose roar I could feel coming up and through the soles of my boots. "Hassan," I said, "the east tunnel. Is the upward door sealed?" A pause. Too long. I could hear him breathing. "No," Hassan said. "That one's still green. Everything behind me's gone red, but the one ahead of them is open. Marcus, why is it open?" And I realized then what was happening. What the sequence meant, why it was starting at the bottom and moving in a pattern that made no sense to me until I stopped looking at it as a malfunction. Whatever was running my building wasn't trying to contain the threat. It was hurting it, opening doors ahead of the thing and closing doors behind it, driving it upward, level by level, like beaters driving game toward the guns, toward the only part of the stadium that was still packed with living people who had nowhere to go because I had just watched the main gate turn red. I had 2 choices, and I had them in the space of a breath. I could try to override the master seal and open the gates, and dump 40,000 panicking people into the streets, along with whatever was already among them, with no way to tell who'd been bitten, no way to stop a stampede in the bottleneck of the exits. Or I could keep them sealed and try to stop the thing in the tunnels before it reached the bowl. With 6 people and myself spread across a building the size of a town, against a system that already had a plan I didn't understand, and a head start I couldn't measure. I keyed the mic and made my voice the river that Hassan's used to be, slow and certain, because the channel was listening, and frightened people take their fear from the calmest voice they can find. Everybody listen. Nobody opens a door to the concourse. Nobody. I don't care what you see down there. The seats stay clean. Hassan, get to that east upward door and hold it. Put your back against it and don't let it open. Lena, find me a way into the system administration. I need to know who's running the seals, and I need to know now. "Marcus," Hassan said. "It's coming this way. I can hear it. It's not footsteps. It's like a lot of people all stopped being careful at the same time." "Then you don't have long," I said, and hated myself for saying it, because Hassan had a wife named Amara and a kid in a town 40 minutes north. A daughter, 6 years old, whose drawings he kept taped inside his locker. And I had just told him to stand in a corridor and wait for the dead to arrive. What I didn't know yet, what none of us knew, was that the containment system hadn't malfunctioned and it hadn't been hacked. It was doing exactly what it had been designed to do, by people who had stood in a room years before any of us were hired and decided what this building was really for. The football was a cover. The crowd was a resource. And the night I'm telling you about wasn't an accident at all. It was a test that someone, somewhere, had finally decided to run. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the tunnels, because that's where we lost the first one. Hassan reached the east upward door before the thing did. I watched it on camera 71, the angle looking down the long gray corridor toward the door he had to hold. He's a big man, Hassan, 240 pounds, built like the rugby player he'd been 20 years ago. And he put his back against the door and braced his feet against the opposite wall. Knees bent, the whole length of his body turned into a strut of muscle and bone wedged between two slabs of concrete. For a moment, I thought it might work. For a moment, watching him set himself, I thought we might hold the line right there at the bottom of the building. That this would be the night's high water mark, and we'd push it back down from here. Then the lights in the east tunnel went out. Not flickered. Went out all at once. The whole zone, a hard cut to black. And the camera switched to infrared with a soft mechanical chirp I couldn't hear but knew was happening. And the corridor turned into a green and black smear of heat. I could see Hassan against the door, a bright human shape, the heat of his exertion making him glow, the white blaze of his breath pulsing from where his face would be. And I could see the things coming down the corridor toward him. And the thing about infrared is that it shows you body heat, the warmth of living things against the cool of the world. And the shapes coming down the corridor were cold. Cooler than Hassan. Cooler than the walls in some places. They moved like men, but they read like furniture, like meat that had been out of the fridge for an hour. Dull gray-green shapes with no bloom of warmth at the chest or the face. And I think that was the moment the last of my ordinary explanations died. Because there is no medical event in the world, no drug, no disease, that drops a man's core temperature while he is still up and walking and reaching. Lights, Hassan said. Marcus, the lights. I can't see them, I can only hear them. Where are they? I'm trying, I said. And I was. My hands flying across the lighting controls, clicking into the east zone, hammering the restore command. But the east zone wouldn't respond. Grayed out. Locked at the system level, the same dead gray as the project threshold zones I didn't yet have a name for. Whoever was running the containment had taken the lights too. And they'd taken them in the exact zone where my man was standing alone in the dark. Which told me something I didn't want to know, which was that the system could see Hassan as clearly as I could, and had decided he should not be able to see. I switched to the audio feed. We have microphones in the service corridors, for incident review, low-fidelity things meant to catch a fight or a fall. And I turned up the east tunnel, and I have not been able to forget what I heard, and I have tried. Not screaming, not at first. A scuffle, the rubber squeal of Hassan's boots fighting for purchase on the concrete as he held the door drumming in its frame as weight came against it from the far side. His breathing fast and ragged, the breath of a man working at the very edge of what his body could do. And then a sound I can only describe as a crowd that has stopped using words. A wet collective murmur. Dozens of throats making the shape of speech with none of the meaning, getting closer, filling the channel. And Hassan saying, very quietly, almost calm now. The panic burned out of him, and something steadier underneath. Marcus, tell Amara I. And then the murmur swallowed him, and the picture on the infrared bloomed white as warmth spilled where warmth should stay inside. And the door he'd been holding stayed shut, which meant he held it to the end, which meant the thing he was protecting the crowd from never got through that particular door. And I have told myself that 1,000 times since, that the door held, that he won the only victory that was his to win, and it has never once helped. I switched off the audio. My hands were not steady on the dial. Lena's voice came through, and she'd heard it too. Everyone on the channel had heard it, the whole detail listening to a man die at his post. And there was a silence on the line that I had to break before it broke us, because grief is a luxury, and we hadn't earned the time for it yet. Hassan held the door, I said, and I made each word land. It's still sealed. He did his job. Nothing got past him. Now we do ours the same way. Lena, the system. Talk to me. Lena had reached the level 2 network room, A closet, really. A rack of humming machines behind a door marked with nothing but a number. She's not a coder, but she's sharp. Sharper than people give her credit for. And she'd found something. Marcus, I'm looking at the containment controller. It's not part of our security network. It's separate. Different hardware, newer than ours. Different colored cabling. Runs off its own power supply with its own battery backup. I can see the indicator lights on the UPS. I've worked here 15 years, and I've never seen this rack. It's tucked behind the others, in the corner, behind a panel that's bolted shut with security screws, the kind you need a special bit for, and there's a label on it. What's the label say? It says Project Threshold. A pause, and I heard her shift, heard the rasp of her sleeve against metal as she leaned closer. And under that, in smaller print, it says Department of... She stopped. The print's worn. No, it's not worn. It's scratched out. Deliberately. Like somebody took a tool to it, scored it back and forth until you can't read it. I can make out department, and then it's just scratches. Project Threshold. I'd never heard the words in my life. And I'd signed every contract, every maintenance agreement, every government inspection sheet, every fire marshal sign-off for 19 years. I had a filing cabinet full of the bones of this building. There was no Project Threshold in any document I'd ever touched, which meant it had been installed without my knowledge, in my building, wired into my walls, drawing my power, sitting silent behind a bolted panel through every match and concert and graduation ceremony for years. And waiting. Can you get into it? I said. There's a terminal. Small screen, looks aftermarket, mounted right on the rack. It's awake. It's asking for a passcode. A pause. And Marcus, there's a clock on the screen, a countdown. Big numbers, top of the display. It says 42 minutes. Until what? It doesn't say until what. It just says Phase 2 in 42 minutes. And under that, there's a status line. It says Phase 1 nominal. Subject propagation within parameters. Phase 1 nominal. Whatever was happening in the tunnels, the system thought it was going to plan. The thing that had killed Hassan was within parameters. If you're listening to this and you're trying to imagine what you'd do in that room, in that chair, watching a clock you didn't start counting down to something you couldn't name, with a man's last words still in your ears, I'd genuinely like to know. Because I have replayed that moment more times than any other, and I still don't know if I made the right first move. Tell me in the comments. I mean it. Here's what I did. I told Lena to leave the passcode alone. I had a bad feeling, a cold certainty, really, that the countdown might speed up if the system thought it was being tampered with. That somewhere in its logic was a rule about interference. And the last thing I wanted was to teach a machine I didn't understand that there were people in the building trying to stop it. You don't poke at something whose rules you don't know when the cost of a wrong poke might be measured in lives. Instead, I sent to Sean, who was the youngest and the fastest of us, a former college sprinter who took the stairs 3 at a time, down toward Lena's position to back her up, because she shouldn't be alone in a closet with that machine and the dark filling up the levels below her. And I told Priya and the 2 field-level men to start clearing the lower vomitories, the ramps that connect the concourse to the bowl, because if the thing in the tunnels was being herded upward, I wanted as many barriers as possible between it and the seats. And I wanted bodies I trusted standing at the choke points. And I started doing the thing I should have done first, which was trying to understand the building I'd never really known. I pulled every system schematic I had access to and started layering them on the second monitor. Dragging the transparent overlays one atop another the way you would build up a picture from tracing paper. The security network in green, the fire suppression grid in red, the HVAC plant in blue, its ducts threading through the structure like veins, the water lines. And then, on a hunch that came from somewhere I didn't examine too closely, the building's original construction blueprints, the ones from the renovation 11 years back, the big one, the 2-year project that had gutted the lower levels and rebuilt them while the team played out of a temporary venue across town. 11 years ago, the renovation, that was when it had gone in. It had to be. 2 years of construction, the whole lower structure open and accessible. The bones of the building exposed, contractors coming and going by the 100. Badges issued and never tracked. Deliveries arriving at all hours. And somewhere in all of that, a system that wasn't on any of my documents got built into the spine of the place. Project Threshold. The containment grid. 48 zones that could seal one at a time. Lighting and power that could be pulled selectively, room by room, in a heartbeat. A network that ran independent of everything I controlled, on its own cables, its own power, its own clock. You don't install that to manage crowds. Crowd management wants doors that open. You install a thing like that for one reason: to hold the population in place against its will, and to be able to take from any part of it the light, the air, the way out, while you stand somewhere safe and watch what happens. I felt sick. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that. A cold weight low in my gut. From understanding. I'd spent 19 years thinking I was protecting these people. Walking the concourses, learning the names of the regulars, talking jumpers down off the upper rail. And the whole time, the building itself had been engineered for the opposite. To hold them in place. To watch. To measure. Marcus. Lena again. Deshaun just got here. He's with me. And I found something else. There's a maintenance log next to the terminal. Paper. An old-fashioned bound logbook hanging on a hook by a string like the ones engineers used to keep. Last entry is dated 3 days ago. It says, a pause. The dry sound of a page turning. It says, system primed. Awaiting live event population threshold. Live event population threshold, 41,000 people. Tonight was a sellout, the biggest crowd of the season, a derby match they'd been advertising for 2 months. They hadn't picked tonight at random. They'd waited for a full house. They'd waited for the number to be high enough that the data would be worth having. Who signed the log? I said. A pause. The page rustled again. It's initialed, Lena said. Just initials, in the signature column. RK. And the floor dropped out from under me because I knew exactly 2 people in the entire building with those initials. And one of them was a vendor on the East Concourse who sold soft pretzels and had worked there 9 years and couldn't have told you what a containment grid was if his life depended on it. And the other one was Reggie Kovac, one of my own men. Field level, right now, on my channel, breathing into a radio 4 floors below me, who I had just sent to clear the lower vomitories alongside Tom and Priya. I didn't say anything over the radio. That was the hardest thing I have ever done with my own voice, in that moment, to keep it level and say nothing. Because if Reggie was part of Project Threshold, then he was listening to everything I said. Every order, every plan. And the only advantage I had left in the whole building was that he didn't know I knew. Good copy, Lena, I said, as flat and ordinary as I could make it. The voice of a man reading off a clipboard. Sit tight with Deshaun. Don't touch the terminal. Watch the screens and feed me movement. I'm working the schematics up here. Understood, she said. And there was something in the way she said it, a half-beat of weight on the word, that told me she'd caught the change in my voice and understood why, and was playing along, asking nothing, trusting that I'd explain when it was safe. 15 years. You learn to talk to someone without saying the thing, to pass a whole message in the space between 2 ordinary words. I pulled up the field-level cameras, 3 of them, the angles covering the ring of vomitories at the bottom of the bowl. There was Tom, working a barrier across the Section 102 vomitory, dragging the heavy steel crowd control fencing into place and lashing it with the cable ties from his belt, sweat through the back of his shirt, doing exactly what I'd asked. No questions. Full effort. Tom was 61 years old and had been doing this work since before the renovation, and he moved like a man half his age when there was a job in front of him. There was Priya, stacking barriers 2 and 3 high at the next vomitory, glancing over her shoulder at the dark mouth of the tunnel every few seconds. Scared, you could see it in the set of her shoulders, but solid, her hands steady on the steel. And there was Reggie. Reggie wasn't building barriers. Reggie was standing at the access door to the field-level electrical room, 30 feet from where Tom and Priya were working. And he had a key in the lock, his own key turning in his own hand. And the field-level electrical room was where the cabling for the East Containment Zone ran. I'd just seen it on the overlay, the project threshold conduit threading right through that room. And as I watched, he turned the key, glanced once over his shoulder at Tom and Priya, and went inside and pulled the door shut behind him. "Tom," I said, keeping the river in my voice. "Tom, listen carefully and don't react. Just keep working. Where's Reggie?" Tom looked around, casual, a man checking on a coworker. I watched him do it on the camera. "He was right here a second ago. Said he was going to check the electrical room, make sure the barriers weren't going to lose power or something. Why you need him?" "Tom, I need you to keep building that barrier, and I need you to stay away from the electrical room. Don't go near it. Can you do that for me? No questions, right now." To his enormous credit, Tom didn't ask why again. There was the smallest hitch, the slightest pause where a lesser man would have pushed, and then he just said, "Copy that," and turned back to the steel. And I loved him for it. Because a man who follows an order he doesn't understand from a voice he trusts is worth 10 men who need to debate it first. And on that night, the difference between those 2 kinds of men was the difference between living and dying. I had a choice. I could confront Reggie directly, on the radio, in front of everyone, demand to know what RK meant and what he was doing in that room, and maybe get an answer, and maybe spook him into doing whatever it was he'd gone in there to do, fast, before I could stop it. Or I could try to get eyes into the electrical room first, watch him, learn what I was dealing with before I tipped my hand and lost my one advantage. There was no camera in the electrical room. Of course there wasn't. Of all the rooms in the building, that was the one Project Threshold would have wanted blind. The one place a man could work unseen. And the fact that I'd never thought it strange in 19 years, that we had no camera in there, told me how completely I'd been managed. How carefully my own picture of my own building had been arranged. So I did the only thing left. I went down there myself. I want you to understand that leaving the control room was, by every rule I'd ever taught and lived by, the wrong move. The control room was the brain. It had the cameras, the comms, the system access, the whole picture. A security chief abandons the control room the way a captain abandons the bridge, which is to say almost never, and only when the bridge is already lost. But the control room couldn't open that electrical room door, and it couldn't lay hands on Reggie Kovac. And it couldn't read the truth or the lie on his face when I asked him what RK meant. Some things you have to do with your body, in the same room as the other man, close enough to smell the fear on him or the lack of it. So I took the master keys off the hook by the door, the full ring, heavy and cold. And the only weapon I had which was a collapsible steel baton from the drawer and a long aluminum flashlight that weighed a good 2 pounds. And I told Lena to watch the screens and feed me everything over the radio. Every movement of the cold mass, every door that changed color. I left the brain of the building behind, alone and unwatched. And I went down into it. The stairwells were the strange part. The crowd noise faded as I descended, level by level, the great ocean roar of it thinning to a murmur and then to almost nothing, replaced by the building's own sounds, the ones you never hear when the place is full. The deep electrical hum of the transformers, the rush and gurgle of water moving in the big pipes overhead, the tick of cooling metal somewhere, the hiss of the ventilation, which sounded different now. And I realized after a flight or two that it sounded different because some of the zones had been sealed and the air wasn't moving the way it should. The building breathing in a strangled rhythm. And underneath all of it, faint at first, getting clearer the lower I went. That wet collective murmur I'd heard on Hassan's microphone. It was below me, in the tunnels. And it was no longer a single sound moving in a single direction. It had spread, broken into pieces, coming from more than one place at once. "Lena, status on the containment zones," I said, low, my mouth close to the radio. 11 red now, she said in my ear, equally low. "And it's changed, Marcus. It's not sequential anymore. They're not going one at a time east to west. They're going red in clusters, 2 and 3 together, in different parts of the building. It's like the system's lost its plan. Or changed it, like it's reacting to something instead of running a sequence. Where's the cold mass, the infrared? Spreading up from sub-level 1 through the east and central stairwells. There's a big concentration pooling at the field-level vomitories, right where Tom and Priya are. The barriers are holding, for now. But, Marcus, there's more of them than there were. A lot more. It's not the same dozen from the tunnel. It's growing. It's growing." Of course it was. Everyone it reached became another one of it. And the lower levels had been full of working people, 200 souls or more scattered through the kitchens and storerooms and corridors. And the system had been opening doors ahead of it the whole time, feeding it new rooms full of warm bodies. And now the tally in the dark below me was climbing with every minute. And I was walking down into the middle of it with a flashlight and a stick. I reached field level. The electrical room was 40 feet down a service corridor lit by the orange emergency lights. The main lights in this zone gone. And Reggie's door was still shut, a seam of brighter white light showing underneath it. I could hear him through it. The click and rattle of equipment, a connector seating, and the murmur of his own voice, low and continuous, like a man talking on a phone or talking to himself to keep himself steady. I put my hand flat on the cool steel of the door and turned the handle slow, testing it, and found it unlocked, the latch giving without resistance. He hadn't sealed it behind him. Either he was sloppy, or he wasn't expecting company, or he wanted to be found. And I didn't like any of the three, and I had about a second to decide that it didn't matter which. I went in fast and low, the way they teach you, baton out in my right hand, flashlight up in my left, throwing the beam ahead of me to fill his eyes. And there was Reggie, kneeling on the concrete in front of an open junction panel, a black handset pressed to his ear, the coiled cable of it running down into the project threshold conduit where someone had spliced in an access point. He turned and looked at me over his shoulder, squinting into my light. And his face did something I will never forget for as long as I live. It crumpled, not with the guilt of a man caught, with relief, the pure, total relief of a drowning man who sees a rope "Marcus," he said, and his voice cracked on it. "Oh, thank God. Thank God it's you. I've been trying to reach somebody who'd listen. Anybody. I think I can stop it. I think there's a way. But I need the control room. And I can't get back up there. All the stairs behind me sealed, and I didn't know who I could trust. I didn't know if you..." I kept the baton up, the beam on his face, my feet planted. "You signed the log, Reggie. RK system primed 3 days ago. Lena's standing in front of it right now, reading your initials." He shook his head fast, side to side, and the words came tumbling out of him in a flood. "And I'm going to give them to you the way he gave them to me. Because everything that happened after that turned on, whether or not I believed them. I didn't prime it. I found it. 3 days ago, I was running a cable check in this room. Routine. Signed off on the work order myself. And I found the panel, and I saw it was open. Somebody'd left it open. And I opened the log out of curiosity, and I saw what it was, the words. And I signed that I'd seen it because that's what I was told to do. Years ago, Marcus, there's a man. He comes by sometimes. A contractor, says he's with the building authority. And a long time ago, he told me that if I ever found anything down here that didn't look like ours, I was to leave it alone and sign the log that I'd seen it and tell no one, not you, not anybody. And he pays me. He's been paying me for years, cash, just to watch this room and report what comes and goes. And I never knew what it was. I swear to God. I swear on my mother. I thought it was some government surveillance thing. Anti-terrorism, the kind of thing you're not supposed to ask about. And 3 days ago, he came in person, and he plugged equipment into that panel. And he told me the threshold was almost ready, and that I should be on shift for the Derby and stay near this room. And I didn't understand what any of it meant until tonight, until the gate sealed and the lights started going out. And I came down here, and I've been trying to figure out how to shut the thing off. And I can't, I don't know the codes. I lowered the baton an inch, not all the way. The flashlight stayed on his face, reading it. And there's a thing you learn in the army about fear, real fear, that you cannot fake the small things, the tremor at the corner of the mouth, the way the eyes can't hold still. And Reggie had all of it. "Who's the man?" I said. "I don't know his real name. He calls himself Hale. Just Hale. He's not building authority. I know that now. I've known it for an hour. But I believed it for years, because why wouldn't I? Marcus, the handset." He held it slightly toward me. "There's a comms line built into this system. Hardwired. It's the only thing in this whole building that reaches outside. The master seal cut everything. Our cell phones have no signal. The internet's dead. The radios can't punch through to the street. I've tried. But this line works. It's a dedicated line. And there's somebody on the other end. And I've been listening to them this whole time, just listening. And Marcus, they think the test is going perfectly. They're happy." He held out the handset to me, his hand shaking. I took it. The plastic was warm from his ear. I put it to mine. And I heard a voice. Calm, male, professional, unhurried. A man reading numbers off a screen somewhere far away from the building where 41,000 people were sealed in with the dead. A man who sounded like he was reviewing quarterly figures. Containment holding at 62%. Subject propagation rate exceeding model by a comfortable margin. Recommend we flag that for the next iteration. Recommend we let Phase 2 run to completion before extraction rather than pulling early. The closeout data is the valuable part. Confirm the observation team is clear of the bowl perimeter and accounted for. We do not want any of our own people inside when the upper seals deploy. I didn't key anything. There was no key to press. It wasn't a radio. It was a phone line. And I just held it and listened and didn't breathe. and the voice on the line said the thing that changed the entire shape of the night. The thing I've never been able to unhear. Phase 2 will flood the bowl. Once the lower population is fully converted, we open the field-level seals and allow propagation to reach the stands. Full density conversion event, top down. That's the entire purpose of the exercise. That's the data we don't have. Estimated time to Phase 2, 31 minutes. Make sure Hale's asset confirms the control room is locked out before then. If anyone's free in there, it could compromise the seal sequence. Hale's asset. That was Reggie. They were waiting for Reggie to confirm that I, in the control room, was locked out, neutralized, before they let the upper seals deploy and flooded the bowl. They wanted to convert all the warm bodies in the tunnels first, build their wave in the dark below, and then open the doors at the bottom of the stands and let it pour up into 40,000 living people sitting shoulder to shoulder with nowhere to run. And they wanted to watch it happen, from somewhere safe, and write down the numbers. I lowered the handset from my ear, slowly. Reggie was watching my face the way a man watches a judge. "You heard them," he said, barely a whisper. "You heard. I'm not lying to you. I couldn't make that up. I wouldn't know how." I believed him. God help me, I believed him. And not just because no man fakes that particular grade of terror, but because the voice on the line had called him an asset. And you don't call a partner an asset. You call a tool an asset. A thing you use and then discard. And somewhere in Reggie's frightened eyes, I think he'd just understood the same thing. That he'd been a tool to Hale for years and was now a loose end. But believing Reggie meant believing all of it, the whole impossible shape of it. And all of it meant that the people running this thing had a man positioned at the field-level seals, ready to open them the moment Phase 2 fired. And they were 31 minutes from the largest mass killing I could imagine, in my building, on my watch, with my name on every safety certificate on the wall. "How many?" I said. "How many people are dead down there already? So their model could get its numbers." "I don't know," Reggie said. "A lot. The kitchens, Marcus, second shift was full, the whole catering crew. I heard it happen. I heard it through the line. They talk about it like inventory." "Lena," I said into the radio because I needed her eyes. "New priority. Forget the passcode for now. The field-level seals, the ones between the vomitories and the bowl, the real ones, the heavy ones. Can you lock them closed from your terminal? Permanently, so they cannot be opened by anyone." A long pause. I could hear her working, the clatter of keys. "Marcus, those seals are controlled by Project Threshold, not by us. They're not on our network. I can see them on this screen. I can see their status. But every control is grayed out, locked. The only thing on this whole screen that isn't grayed out is the passcode field." "Marcus." Her voice changed, sharpened. "I think the passcode unlocks everything. I think it's the master. If we had the passcode, we'd own the whole system, every seal, every light, every door, and we could shut the whole thing down. Then we need the passcode," I said. And Reggie, behind me, still on his knees, said quietly, "Hale told me once, years ago. He was drunk. It was a Christmas thing, the contractor's party. He'd had too much and he got, you know how some men get. They want you to know they're important. He said something stupid. He said the access for the whole system was named after the thing that made it possible. He laughed and he said, the password's the date the money came through, the day the funding cleared. He thought it was funny. I didn't even know what he was talking about. I thought it was contractor talk, and I forgot about it until right now. The date the money came through. 11 years ago, during the renovation, The money that built Project Threshold had cleared on some specific day. And that date was the key to the whole system, the single string of numbers that owned my building. And I had no idea what it was. And the only man alive who might tell me for certain was a contractor named Hale, who was not in the building and would not be answering his phone. But I knew where to look, because I'd signed every contract for 19 years, and the renovation contracts were in the control room, in the gray fireproof cabinet against the back wall, second drawer, and somewhere in that mountain of paper, there would be a funding milestone, a date the construction account had been capitalized. And renovation budgets that size get audited within an inch of their lives, so the dates would be exact, to the day. The problem was that the contracts were in the control room, 4 levels up, and I was down here on field level. And between me and the stairs, the wet murmur of the tunnels had gotten louder, much louder, close enough now that I could pick out individual voices in it that weren't voices anymore. Then Lena's voice came over the radio sharp and fast. "Marcus, the central stairwell just went infrared. The cold mass is climbing it, fast, heading for field level. You've got maybe 4 minutes before it reaches your corridor. Whatever you're doing down there, do it now." I looked at Reggie. He looked back at me, and I saw the question in his face before he asked it. The question of what I was going to do with him. Whether I was going to leave the man who took the money kneeling alone in a sealed room while the dark came for him. And I made the decision that everything else hung on. "You stay on that handset," I said. "You keep listening. Every word they say, you relay it to me on the radio. The second you hear them say anything about Phase 2 timing, anything about the upper seals, you tell me instantly. You're my ears on the enemy now, Reggie. You're the only one who can hear them. Can you do that?" He nodded, fast. And there was something in it, in the way his shoulders came up out of their slump. The look of a man who has been given a way to make right the thing he let happen. A job, a purpose, a rope to climb, instead of a sentence. And I have thought a great deal in the years since about whether I trusted him because it was the wise thing, or because I needed it to be true. Because the alternative was to deal with him hard. And I did not have it in me that night to put my baton across the skull of a frightened man on his knees. Tell me what you would have done. A man who took the money for years, who signed the log, who you have worked beside for a decade, hands you a story and a lifeline in the same breath. In the dark, with the clock running. Do you leave him at the controls of the only line to the people trying to murder everyone in the building? I did. I have never been certain it was right. I went back up the corridor, and the murmur was close now. That tide coming in sound rolling toward me from the mouth of the central stairwell. And the orange emergency lights in that stairwell were already dead, swallowed. So I broke right and took the west one instead. The one with the door that sticks in humid weather. And it stuck, of course it stuck. On the worst night of my life it stuck. And I lost 10 full seconds I did not have hauling up on the handle and putting my shoulder into the steel, the old trick of lifting it on its hinges. And behind me, at the mouth of the central stairwell, the first of them came lurching out into the field-level corridor. I'd seen them on infrared. I'd heard them on audio. But seeing one in the flesh, in the orange bleed of the emergency lighting, is a different category of knowing, the kind that lodges in your spine. It had been a vendor, one of the soft pretzel sellers from the East Concourse, and you could tell because it still wore the apron. And the little paper hat clung to one side of its head at an angle that, on any other night, would have been comic. Its movements were wrong in a way the cameras hadn't captured, couldn't capture, a total absence of self-preservation, walking flat into the wall and bouncing off it and correcting and walking again. No flinch, no care for its own body, drawn toward the warmth of me the way water finds the low ground, blind and certain. And it was cold. Even from 20 feet, I would swear I felt the cold come off it. A draft where there should have been the ordinary heat of a living man. Though I know that's probably my mind painting the feeling onto the picture after the fact, the way the mind does. I got the west door open and shouldered through it and slammed it behind me. And the same sticking that had cost me 10 seconds now bought me everything, because the door jammed in its swollen frame the instant it shut, wedged tight, and the vendor thing hit the other side of it with a flat, heavy sound, and I felt the whole slab shudder against my back. But it held, jammed too tight for dead hands with no leverage and no patience to work it open. I went up the stairs 2 at a time, then 3, my legs filling with fire, the crowd noise swelling back around me as I climbed up out of the dark and into the part of the building that still belonged to the ordinary world. And I burst into the control room, and Lena and Deshawn weren't there because they were still on level 2. But the screens were all still live, the whole building laid out in glowing rectangles, and the countdown on the Project Threshold feed that Lena had patched through to one of my monitors read 26 minutes. I went straight to the fireproof cabinet, hauled the second drawer open, and tore through the renovation file with hands that wouldn't quite obey me. 2 years of construction generates a mountain of paper, and I went through it fast and rough, dropping pages, the safety reports and the change orders and the inspection sign-offs sliding to the floor, looking for the funding milestone, the capitalization memo. And I found it, near the back. A single sheet on the parent authority's letterhead recording the funding of the construction account. And my stomach turned over, because there were 3 dates on it, not 1. An initial deposit, a second tranche, the main disbursement, and a final closeout. 3 separate dates across the 2-year project. And Reggie had said the date the money came through, singular, one day. And I didn't know which of the 3 Hale meant, and a wrong guess might lock the system, or worse, might trip some interference rule and speed the clock. And I had maybe 3 guesses, and probably fewer. Lena, I said, I've got the memo. There are 3 candidate dates. I need you back at that terminal and ready, because we may get 1 shot at this, and I don't know which date is right. Deshawn and I are moving back to the network room now, she said. And I heard the slap of their feet on concrete. 30 seconds. Talk me through them when I'm there. And then Reggie's voice came over the radio from 4 floors down, fast and high and frightened. Marcus, they just said something. They noticed. The line went quiet on their end, and then a different voice came on and said the asset's gone silent and they don't like it. They said if the control room isn't confirmed locked out in the next 2 minutes, they're scrubbing the timing and moving phase 2 up. They're going to do it early. They're going to open the upper seals early. They knew. Somehow they'd worked it out. That Reggie had gone quiet because Reggie was no longer theirs. That the control room wasn't locked out, being that I was loose in it. That their clean experiment was slipping. And the moment they knew, the moment the test looked like it might fail, they did the thing that all such people do at the end. They stopped caring about clean data and started caring about not being caught. And the fastest way to bury what they'd done was to let it finish, dump the wave into the bowl, and call the whole thing a freak tragedy. An outbreak of unknown origin, a stadium full of bad luck. Lena, are you there? I said. I'm here. I'm at the terminal. Passcode field's live. Give me the first one. Enter the first date, I said, and read it off the memo. Slow, the initial deposit. The day, the month, the year. Try it now. I heard her keying it in, the soft tap of each digit, and then the silence of waiting that lasted about 1,000 years. Rejected, she said, and her voice was very controlled. "Marcus, it says 1 attempt remaining before lockout. 1. If I get the next one wrong, the terminal locks for 60 minutes. There's a timer. 1 attempt. I'd had 3 dates, I'd burned 1, so 2 dates remained and 1 guess. And a 50-50 that wasn't even a true 50-50 because I had no real reason to favor the second tranche over the final closeout. Both of them sitting right there on the page. Both of them real days when real money had moved. And the clock on my monitor now read 22 minutes, except the clock was a lie because they just decided to move it up. And somewhere on field level, a man with a paper hat was the leading edge of a tide that was 30 seconds from being invited up into the seats. I stood there with the memo trembling in my hand, and I made myself stop. I made myself slow all the way down, the way you do behind a rifle when the shot matters and the wind is moving and you only get the one. The date the money came through. The date the money came through. Hale was a man, and men are not random number generators. A man chooses a password he can remember, a password that means something to him. The date the money came through. A man like Hale, a man who gets drunk at a Christmas party and needs the room to know how important he is. Who names his secret system after the moment it became real to him, does not choose the initial deposit, because the initial deposit is just an intention, a promise, paperwork, nothing in your hand yet. And he does not choose the final closeout, because the closeout is the end. The boring administrative death of a project, also just paperwork. He chooses the moment it became real, the second tranche, the day the big money actually landed in the account, and the dirt could finally be turned, and the thing he was building stopped being an idea and started being concrete and steel in the ground. That is the date a man like Hale remembers. That is the date he names his God after. It was a guess. I want to be honest with you. It was a guess, built on 19 years of reading the men I dealt with, the fixers and the contractors and the officials, on knowing how a certain kind of man thinks about a certain kind of money and a certain kind of power. And it was the only thing I had between 40,000 people in the dark. "Lena," I said. "The second date, the middle one, the second tranche, the main disbursement. I'm going to read it to you twice, and I need you to read it back to me before you press anything." And I read it, slow, each number twice, and she read it back. And it was right. "Marcus, if this is wrong," she said. "I know," I said. "I know exactly what it is if it's wrong. Enter it." The radio went quiet, the whole channel silent, every one of us hanging on a string of digits. Down on field level, I could hear Reggie breathing into the handset, fast and shallow. On the screens, the cold mass at the Section 102 vomitory pressed against Tom and Priya's barriers, the steel fencing bowing inward under the weight of it. And I watched Tom put his shoulder into the strongest section and brace, a 61-year-old man holding back the dead with his own body the way Hassan had held the door. And I thought, not again, please, not him too, not again. "Entering," Lena said. And then, after the 3 longest seconds of my entire life, her voice came back, hushed and wondering and almost broken. "Marcus, it took it. I'm in. The whole system's unlocked. Everything's green, everything's live. I can see all of it, every seal, every zone, every light. Oh my God, Marcus, I have the whole building." I want to tell you I felt triumph in that moment. I didn't. What I felt was the cold understanding that being able to control Project Threshold meant being able to do precisely what Hale's people wanted to do, just in reverse. And that the entire distance between saving 40,000 human beings and slaughtering them was now a sequence of commands typed by my deputy on a terminal 4 floors below me, and that there was still a man, somewhere with his hand near the field-level seals, and that I had, in the space of one entered password, made myself the single most important target in the building. Lena, first thing, before anything else, the field-level seals, the real ones. Close them and lock them. Make it so they cannot be opened, not by us, not by them, not by anybody, ever. Wall the bowl off from the tunnels completely. Doing it now, she said. Pulling up the seal controls, selecting all field-level barriers, override to permanent close. Marcus, they're moving. The field seals are coming down. Tom, Priya, get back from the vomitories. Get back right now. The heavy seals are deploying behind your barriers. Move! On the screen, I watched the great steel field-level seals descend. The real ones. The Project Threshold ones. Slabs of plate steel a foot thick, sliding down out of slots in the concrete. I had walked past 10,000 times and never recognized for what they were. Slamming home behind the flimsy crowd control fencing that Tom and Priya had built. Sealing the dark mass into the tunnels with a series of deep, concussive thuds I felt come up through 4 floors of the building. Tom and Priya scrambled back just clear of them. And the cold tide that had been pressing toward the seats was suddenly cut off, walled away, denied. The crowd in the bowl never knew. 40,000 people watching a football match, on their feet for a free kick, while a foot of steel dropped into the concrete beneath their seats and saved every single one of their lives. And not one of them so much as glanced down. And then the lights in the control room went out, all at once, the screens the only glow left in the dark, and a voice behind me, calm and professional and entirely familiar, the same voice I'd just been listening to on Reggie's handset, said, "You're better than the model predicted. By a wide margin, actually. That's a genuine shame. Because the model was the only thing keeping you alive." I turned. There was a man standing in the doorway of my control room, lit from behind by the dim emergency glow of the corridor, dressed in a maintenance uniform that didn't sit right on him. Too clean, too new. The creases still in it. A man who'd put on the costume of someone who belonged here. He was holding a pistol, and he held it the way a man holds a tool he has held 10,000 times. Loose and low and ready, no drama in it. Hale, not a name on a contract, the man who had walked into my sealed and locked down building through a route I didn't know existed. Because, of course, Project Threshold had its own ways in and out. Its own doors that answered to its own codes. Of course, the people who built a machine to trap 40,000 strangers had built themselves a quiet little back door to walk in and out as they pleased. "You're the observation team," I said, keeping my hands where he could see them, keeping my voice level, buying seconds. The line said the observation team was supposed to be clear of the bowl perimeter. "The observation team watches from outside," Hale said. "Comfortable van, good coffee, screens. I'm not the observation team. I'm the cleanup. I'm what they send in when the data goes wrong and somebody needs to make the building tell a simpler story afterward." He glanced past me at the dark wall of screens, at the green status lights that meant the bowl was sealed. "And you've made the data go very wrong, Marcus. Population threshold met, propagation initiated, beautiful phase 1 numbers, and then nothing. A contained event with 0 conversion of the primary population. From our end, that reads as a total failure, and failures get buried." He lifted the pistol a degree, no more. "You understand how this works. I can see that you do." "How many people died down there?" I said. "In the tunnels, so your model could fill in a row on a spreadsheet." 211, last count off the line, Hale said. And the worst thing about it, the thing that stayed with me, was that he didn't say it with any cruelty at all. He said it the way you'd report a temperature, a stock price, a number with no people in it. Vendors, mostly. Cleaners, kitchen staff. The lower density population, which is what the sub-density trial calls for. Acceptable parameters, everyone. The real prize was always the bowl, the high-density conversion. That's the data nobody has and everybody wants, and you took it off the table. He shrugged. A small, economical movement that didn't disturb the pistol at all. So now you and your colleagues stop being part of the data and start being part of the cleanup. It's nothing personal. There's no person in it at all, really. That's rather the point of how I work. 211. Hassan among them, somewhere in that number, a man and his last unfinished sentence. And the thing I understood, looking at Hale's flat professional face in the glow of the screens, was that there was no version of this in which he let any of us walk out of the building. Because we'd heard the handset, we'd seen the log. We'd read the words Project Threshold off a scratched-out label. And men like Hale do not leave witnesses. They leave tragedies with simple explanations, grieving families, a memorial, an inquiry that finds nobody at fault. "Lena," I said, out loud, plainly, because there was no point hiding it now, and every point in him knowing I wasn't alone. The control room, the lights, on my word. Hale's eyes flicked, just for a fraction of a second, to the dark screens, to the realization that I had a deputy somewhere, with her hands wrapped around the entire system, every light and every door, and that fraction of a second, that tiny involuntary glance away from me, was the only opening I was ever going to get. And I knew it the way you know a single thing with your whole body. "Now," I said. The control room lights blazed to full, every fixture, instant and total, blinding white after the dark. And Hale flinched, his free hand coming up by reflex, the pistol jerking toward his eyes. And I was already moving, low and hard and committed, the way the army drills into you for the moment when there is no good option left, and the only wrong move is hesitation. And I hit him across the waist with my shoulder and drove him back. And we went down together into the bank of monitors, glass and plastic exploding around us. And the pistol went off once into the ceiling. And the sound of it in that small concrete room was like the end of the world. A flat, enormous slap that left my ears ringing. I'm not going to dress up what came next, because it wasn't a fight scene from a film. It was two middle-aged men rolling on a floor covered in broken glass, fighting with everything they had for control of a gun. And it was ugly and slow and graceless and desperate, all knees and elbows and grunting. And he was strong, and he knew exactly what he was doing. His hand clamping over the slide, his weight grinding me down into the shards. But I had 19 years of knowing every square inch of that room, where the desk leg was, where the cable run came up out of the floor. And my hand fell on the long aluminum flashlight I dropped when I came through the door. 2 pounds of machined metal. And I got it. And I used it twice, the way you finish a thing when finishing it is the only mercy left to anyone. And after the second time, he stopped fighting, and I lay there on the broken glass, with my chest heaving and his pistol in my fist, and blood, his and mine, slick on my hands. And I did not feel for one instant like I had won anything at all. "Marcus." Lena in my ear, urgent, climbing. "Marcus, the camera in there's down. I can't see. Talk to me. Are you hurt? What's happening?" "I'm here," I managed. "He's down. He's out. I'm here. I'm okay." I got up, slow, glass falling off me. My hands were torn from the shards, and I genuinely could not feel them. I picked up Hale's pistol from where it had skidded, checked it the way you check a weapon without thinking. And I sat down in my chair in front of the wrecked monitors, glass crunching under me. And the screens that still worked showed me the building, my building. the way I had never once seen it, and the way I will always see it now. The tunnels, sealed tight, full of cold things that had been the people I was hired to protect, walled away from the world behind a foot of steel. The bowl, full of warm, living people who would file out into the night and go home and never know. Would talk about the match for a week and forget it. The field-level SEALs holding, and the countdown on the Project Threshold feed, frozen now, dead, stopped at 19 minutes. Because Lena owned the system, and the system had no more orders to follow, and nowhere left to hurt anyone. "It's over," Lena said, and I could hear her wanting it to be true. "Marcus, I think it's over. The SEALs are locked permanent. Nothing's getting to the bowl. We did it." But it wasn't over, and we both knew it before the sentence had finished, because there were 211 dead in the tunnels of a building full of 40,000 living. And there was a man bleeding on my control room floor who'd been sent by an observation team that was still out there, in a comfortable van somewhere with good coffee and a row of screens, watching, waiting for a result. And the master gate seal was still glowing red on the panel. And the moment I released it and opened those gates and let 40,000 people out into the night, the question of what to tell them and what to tell the world became a weight I had absolutely no idea how to carry. "Reggie," I said into the radio. "Reggie, you still with me down there?" "I'm here," he said, and his voice was small. Marcus," the line went dead. The handset. The people on the other end, they cut it, all at once, mid-sentence. I think they know it failed. I think they're running." Of course they were. The observation team would already be packing up the van, wiping the drives, deleting the model, becoming people who had never been within a mile of the stadium. Hale was the cleanup, and Hale was bleeding on my floor. And with Hale down, there was no one left to make the building tell a simpler story, which meant, for the first time all night, that the story was mine. That whatever this building had done, and whoever had built it to do it, the next thing it said about itself was going to come out of my mouth. I sat there for a long moment, longer than I should have, and I looked at the gate seal indicator glowing its steady red, the thing that had started all of it at 08:43 by the old clock above the door. 40,000 people on one side of those gates. The truth on the other. "Lena," I said, "release the master seal. Open the main gate. Open all the gates. The match is nearly over, and these people need to be able to go home." "And the tunnels," she said. "The bodies, Project Threshold, Hale. Marcus, what do we do with all of it?" The second we open the gates and the authorities come, the building authority comes. And the building authority is who Hale answered to, or who his bosses answered to. We don't know. "We keep the lower seals locked," I said. "Permanent. Nothing comes up from below, no matter who asks. We get the crowd out clean and calm. No panic. No idea anything happened down there. Let them go home thinking they watched a football match. And then we make calls. Real ones. Not the building authority. Not anybody local. Not anybody who could be part of a cleanup. We bring in the kind of people who can't be made to disappear a thing this size. And we hand them everything. The log with your initials, Reggie. The handset and the line it runs to. The funding memo and the date that unlocked the system. Every command Lena entered tonight. All of it time-stamped. We make a record so big and so detailed that nobody can quietly fold it up and put it in a drawer. Because the only way this never happens again, in some other full building on some other big night, is if it can't be buried. There was a silence on the line, and then Lena said quietly, the paramedic in her doing the cold math, "They'll come for us. The people who do this don't leave loose ends. and we just became the biggest loose end there is. You know that." "I know," I said. "And was it the right call? Opening the gates instead of holding everyone, quarantining the bowl until we knew for certain the infection was contained?" "Because we don't know for certain, Marcus. We sealed the tunnels, and we're nearly sure the field seals held. But nearly sure isn't the same thing, and if there's one infected person already up in those stands from before we sealed it?" And that is the question I have never been able to answer. The one I'll put to you now, because you've come this far with me, through the whole of that night, and you've earned the right to weigh it with me. We were sure the field seals held. We were almost sure, but almost sure, with 40,000 people and a thing in the dark that drops a man's temperature while he walks, is not the same as sure. And I knew it then, and I know it now. Hold them, keep the gates red, and you risk a panic in a sealed building, a crush at the bottlenecks, a stampede that kills hundreds for an absolute certainty in order to prevent a maybe. Open them, let them stream out into the city, and you risk letting something walk out among them if you guessed wrong about a single steel seal a foot thick. I open them. If you had been in that chair, with torn hands and a dead man's blood on the floor, and your deputy's voice in your ear, and the old clock ticking, would you have done the same? I'd truly like to know. The gates went green at 9:31 p.m. I watched the red indicator flip to green, and I felt nothing like relief, only the sick lightness of a thing that can't be taken back. The match ended 4 minutes later. A draw, I learned afterward, though I never saw a second of it. 41,000 people poured out of the building into the cool autumn night, into the smell of exhaust and fried food and damp pavement, talking about the game and the traffic and where to get a late meal. And not one of them looked back at the building that had very nearly become their grave. I watched them go on the cameras that still worked. A great slow river of people flowing out through the gates and into the streets and away, carrying their ordinary evening home with them, never knowing. I watched Tom and Priya down at field level, exhausted, Tom bleeding a little from a cut on his forearm where the barrier steel had caught him. Both of them herding the last stragglers up and out with smiles fixed on their faces, because that is the job. You smile so they don't think to be afraid. And I have never in my life been prouder of two people than I was of those two in that moment. We got Deshaun and Lena up from the level 2 network room once the crowd had thinned. We got Reggie up from field level, escorting him through the one stairwell I knew was clear. And I'll tell you the truth. When he came through the control room door and saw Hale on the floor and the wreck of the monitors and the blood, he sat down hard against the wall and put his face in his hands and wept. The deep, ugly weeping of a man whose whole understanding of himself has come apart in his hands. And I let him. I didn't say a word, because a man who took the money for years and then spent the worst night of his life on his knees in a sealed room trying to undo what he'd helped enable is a complicated thing. And I did not have it in me that night to judge him cleanly. Maybe I should have. Maybe a better man would have. Tell me, if you want, whether you think I was right to let it go. The people I called came in the small hours, 2 and 3 in the morning, the building dark and emptied and humming around us. Not the building authority. Federal. Real badges, the kind that don't flicker when you say words like Project Threshold. The kind that don't suddenly remember an urgent phone call they have to step out and make. They listened to all of it. They went down into the tunnels in suits I won't describe, with lights and equipment that turned the sealed dark into a crime scene. And over the following days, they brought up 211, one at a time. And they took Hale, who lived, which is a thing I have never decided how to feel about, alive and able to talk, and also alive and able to be reached by the people he'd worked for. They took the maintenance log with Reggie's initials and the handset and traced the line it ran to, and the renovation memo with the 3 dates and the one circled in my own pen. They took the full record of every command Lena had entered, time-stamped to the second. The digital proof that the people in that building had tried to stop the thing rather than start it. I told them everything, in a gray room with a recorder running, for hours. So did Lena, in the same flat, clear voice she'd used all night. And so, eventually, did Reggie. Every dollar Hale had ever handed him, every visit, every report he'd ever made, going back the better part of a decade. And his testimony turned out to be the thing that mattered most of all. Because a system never indicts the men who designed it. They're too careful, too insulated. But a frightened man who watched them do it, who can name the dates and the cache and the back doors, that man can put a crack in the whole edifice. Reggie was the crack. I don't know how high it went. I never will. They told me Project Threshold was being investigated at the highest levels. And I believe that statement about as much as I believe anything that comes from people who carry that particular kind of badge, which is to say I believed it was a sentence they were trained to say. What I know for certain is this. The stadium closed for renovations again. A real one this time. And when the contractors went in, they gutted the lower levels down to the bare concrete and rebuilt them from nothing. And I have always understood that to mean that they were tearing out more than old wiring. And I know that I was not asked to come back. And that I did not ask. 19 years. I gave that building 19 years of my life. Learned its every breath and habit and blind spot, and the whole time it had been built, in its bones, to do the precise opposite of everything I thought I was doing inside it. You don't go back to a thing like that. You can't. The friend was never your friend. Lena left the field too, not long after. We talk sometimes, a phone call every few months. And we don't talk about that night, not directly, not the tunnels or the handset or the sound on Hassan's microphone. There is a thing that happens between two people who watch the same horror through the same set of screens. A kind of shorthand grief that doesn't need the words, that lives in the pauses. And we have it. And that is enough. It has to be. I think about Hassan most of all. About the door he held in the dark, in a corridor where the lights had been taken from him on purpose, deliberately, by people in a comfortable van who wanted to watch what would happen to a man in the dark. He never knew about Project Threshold. He died doing exactly what he believed the job was, putting his big body between the crowd and a thing that should never, ever have been allowed inside the building. And the fact that the building itself had opened its own doors to invite that thing in is a truth I have never been able to make any kind of peace with. I went to see Amara, his wife, a few weeks after, sat in her small kitchen with the drawings still on the fridge, the daughter's drawings, and I told her that he held the door to the very end, that nothing got past him, that he saved more lives than she could count, all of which is true, every word. And I did not tell her the rest. I have wondered ever since whether that silence was a mercy I gave her or a cowardice I gave myself. And the older I get, the more I suspect those two things are the same thing far more often than any of us would like to admit. Here is the part I keep coming back to, the part that won't let me sleep on certain nights, even now, years on. The thing in the tunnels, the cold thing in the apron with the paper hat clinging to its head, that was not an accident, not a leak, not a stroke of terrible luck. Somebody introduced it into a full building on the biggest night of the season because they wanted to know what would happen, how fast it would move, how dense the conversion would get in a packed crowd. And they built the architecture, the 48 zones and the selective lights, and the foot-thick steel seals for one reason, which was to hold the answer in place long enough to measure it. They did not fear the dead. They studied them. They filed them under parameters. And the single, most frightening thing I learned that night, the thing that has outlasted the cold and the murmur and the recoil of Hale's pistol against the ceiling, is that the monster was never the thing in the tunnels at all. The monster was the room full of people, somewhere I will never find, who looked at 41,000 living human beings enjoying a football match on an ordinary autumn evening and saw a sample size. The seal turned red at 8:43 p.m. I have thought about that timestamp more than any other number in my entire life. 43 minutes after 8 o'clock on a perfectly ordinary evening in a building full of people who simply trusted the way we all trust every day, without ever once thinking about it, that the doors would open again when they wanted to leave. And they did open in the end. But only because a swollen door stuck in its frame and bought me 10 seconds. And a man at a Christmas party years ago drank too much and made a joke about a password. And a deputy I'd trusted for 15 years had hands that stayed steady on a terminal in the dark. And a guess about how a certain kind of man thinks about a certain kind of money happened, on that one night, to be right. Pull out any single one of those threads, and the night ends another way entirely. 40,000 answers to a question that nobody, anywhere, should ever have been allowed to ask. If you take one single thing from everything I've told you, take this. The safest feeling place you will ever stand is a building full of people who all quietly believe the doors will open when they want them to. Most of the time, they will. But somebody built those doors. And somebody, at some point, in some room you'll never be invited into, decided what they're really for. And you almost never ever get to find out which somebody you've been trusting until the light above the gate turns red. It has never really gone green for me again, if I'm honest. Some part of me is still sitting in that chair in front of a wall of broken glass, hands torn, a dead man's weight against my legs, watching that one red indicator and waiting to see which way it's going to turn. I expect now that some part of me always will be. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. If this story held you, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you were listening from, and whether you would have opened those gates or held them shut. Stay with the channel, and I'll keep telling you the things the buildings would rather you never found out.